Hello, guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Unique Items. Today, we're going to be going over one of the Mythic Uniques, which is one of the new uniques that got added into Diablo 4 1.5. They basically just changed all the Uber uniques to purple, and now they have a purpley aura on the ground now. And on top of that, they also changed the name from Uber to Mythic. I don't really like the Mythic name, but the purple color's okay. I'm fine with it. The main thing about this was that they just wanted to make it stand out, from the other items when you drop them. So, like, when you see it on the ground next to, like, a unique item, you're like, okay, that's obviously not a unique item. That's a mythic, and then, like, yeah, it just helps you out to differentiate it. Although, honestly, when you have, like, a big pile of uniques on the ground, it gets lost. It gets lost in the big pile of uniques. You can't even really see the purple beam. It's kind of funny. Now, mine was crafted. I actually crafted mine, but you can find this from any of the tormented bosses, and it also drops from Uber, Duriel, and Uber and Dariel, as well as you can find it randomly throughout the world, but at a much more diminished rate. I actually crafted mine, and I crafted it with increased damage reduction, which is amazing. It went from the normal damage reduction to 17.5, which is really cool. It also has an implicit now. They changed the implicit to 100% bonus damage, which is kind of nice. On top of this, it also has 143 all stats. As you can see, I've already masterworked it, and I kind of really don't want to unmasterwork it because I got a good roll on the maximum life. I like that. It's actually, I think it's 45% maximum life now. Let me see if I can quickly find a picture of the new version so we can compare the greater affix stats to the other. Because, that way we don't have to re-roll my jank. So as you can see here, it's 114 all stats, 35% maximum life now, and it's also a lucky hit to heal up to 2,687 life with a 10% damage reduction. Mine has 143 all stats now, 52.5% maximum life, 17.5% damage reduction, and 3,359 life heal, which is really nice. In general, when it comes to this weapon, I like to think about this as a very defensive weapon because it makes you very strong defensively. However, there is some offensive aspects to this that we need to talk about. So first off, obviously they added the 100% additive bonus, which isn't like amazing on its own. The 143 all stats, however, also gives you armor. It gives you resistances. It also gives you overpower damage. It gives you healing received, resource generation, and it gives you critical strike chance and dodge chance, which is kind of nice. As you can see, I currently have 4.1 dodge chance and 8.1 crit. Put the sword on, and now I have 11% critical strike, 5.5% crit. Right, so it's definitely giving me a buff to basically all of my stats, which is really nice. On top of this, the damage reduction, the flat damage reduction is amazing. With the 10%, even just the 10% is amazing, but 17.5 is even better. And it also gives us a special effect, which is lucky hit up to a 25% chance to deal shadow damage. And that shadow damage is 12,030 shadow damage to surrounding enemies. And their damage dealt is reduced by 20% for 5 seconds. So when you're attacking with this, you have a chance to just have this shadow damage bump come out, and let's see if we can get it to happen on camera here. This isn't exactly the best lucky hit ability. And of course, Tyraels might be obscuring it as well. Let's go with something that hits multiple targets real quick, just so that we can get a good number of hits and have the lucky hits broadly apply across multiple targets. Now you can kind of see the shadow damage little thing come out. I think that's the shadow damage thing. It's honestly understated, if I remember correctly. Like, it doesn't really show up as easily on the characters. And let's try another ability. So let's really go through the process of seeing what we can do to make this ability, the shadow effect, appear. I think you can clearly see the damage happening from the shadow effect, but not the actual shadow effect. It's actually so understated, it's not even funny. So, you notice how sometimes the training dummy over here is getting a damage bump? There you go. So 36,555. That damage bump that's happening every once in a while, that was 101,000, is the damage bump that is causing the damage reduction. Now, the interesting thing about this damage reduction is it is applying to the monster and it's not applying to you. So it actually kind of bypasses some of the problems of damage reduction, which other things might have. So if you're unaware of how damage reduction works, is most of the time damage reduction is applying to you. So when the monster smacks you in the face, you gotta like reduce the damage that they're dealing to you. And the cap on that is 85%. Because the 20% is applying to the monster and not to you, it's actually bypassing the 85% cap. And let me give you an example of how this could potentially work. So let's say, for instance, a monster comes in and he attacks you for, I don't know, so let's say 10,000 damage. And you have 85% damage reduction, which is essentially the hard cap. It doesn't get any better than that. That's going to bring that down to 1,500 damage. 1,500 damage is the lowest that could ever possibly be, and it's very hard to hit the 85% cap because it's cumulatively worse as you reach closer and closer to the cap. Basically, is how it works. Like each damage reduction that you have is it's more and more difficult for that damage reduction to actually remove any damage, and it's because it applies in order, and it makes it much more difficult to actually reduce damage. So, like to give you an example. If I had 50% damage reduction flat, which is a very nice number, and somebody comes in with 10,000 damage and I reduce 50%, then 50% is going to reduce that by 5,000. However, if I had 10% damage reductions instead, I could do 10,000 damage minus 10%, and then 9,000 minus 10%. And then 8,100 minus 10%, and then 7,290 minus 10%. And how many have we done so far? We've done 1, 2, 3. I'm sorry, no, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we need one more. So minus 10%. And you notice that we didn't quite hit that same half number, right? Now we're at 5,904. So the damage reductions actually become less and less useful the further down the line they are because they're reducing the reduced number, right? But the interesting thing here is that because this is applying to the monster instead, we're in a different situation. So say, for instance, you're in that same situation where you have 85% damage reduction and a monster comes in with a 10,000 damage hit. Well, because we're reducing the monster's damage, not our damage reduction, we're going to take that 10,000 and reduce it by 20% right off the top, which is going to bring that 10,000 down to 8. Then we subtract our 85% from that, and it's going to go down to 1,200. So as you can see, we've reduced it a little bit further, 300 points more, essentially, than we would have if we were just applying the 85% damage reduction directly to the damage that they were outputting. And this is the very magical thing about how, like, reducing the damage that the monster's actually dealing to you kind of helps out. On top of this, Doombringer is not a purely defensive item. Even though it does appear to be a purely defensive item on the surface, it actually can be a very powerful offensive item too if you build it. And what do I mean? Well, Overpower, which is the mechanic that a lot of characters use to dish out damage, like for instance, Bone Spirit Necromancers can get Overpower through the Banished Lord's Talisman. You can also get free Overpowers for Blood Skills. You can get free Overpowers on your Barbarian. There's tons of ways to get free Overpowers, and you can also Overpower naturally as well. But when you do Overpower, the damage of Overpower is actually based off of your damage, your health. So you can read it right here. It says extra damage granted to skills when they overpower, further increased at the moment of impact based on your maximum life, amount of fortify, and includes the inherent increased damage dealt by overpowers based on your current life up to times 50% when at maximum life. So basically what this means is that the more life you have and the more damage you get with Overpower, and the more life you have, the more Fortify amount you have, because your Fortify is based on your life, and the more Fortify you have, the more damage you get with Overpower. So something like this, which is going to increase your HP by a massive degree, as you can see here, I'm going from 25,685 to a massive bump of 39,181. And of course, this is an additive bonus. A lot of people don't know that the life bonuses actually stack on top of each other cumulatively in a way that makes them more effective the more life bonuses that you add. So when you have something like a massive life bonus like this and you're using all your royal rubies and you've got various other things that are giving you bonuses, you're definitely going to get even more life than the 52.5% that you have here, and you could potentially triple roll this. So this is the key here. So you get a greater affix with the maximum life, you triple roll the greater affix on the maximum life, get as much maximum life as you can, and you can utilize that to enhance your overpowers. Another way that you can potentially use this maximum life to your advantage is the barbarian. The barbarian builds thorns based on the amount of life he has. He has a special passive. I think it's the outburst passive, or it might be the toughest nails. I'm pretty sure it's outburst. And basically, what it does is it gives you a flat amount of thorns per amount of HP that you have. And for every certain amount of HP you have, it just gives you more and more and more thorns. And so having something like this that you can scale your HP to ridiculous numbers can also potentially allow you to scale your thorns to ridiculous numbers. And then on top of that, we also have things that give you thorns based on your fortify, which is also a whole new thing now through the tempering system. So you can now get access to percentage-based fortify thorns. And let's go take a look at those real quick because I wanna read those to you. But in general, and he's being a butt. That's why I'm holding him like this. If you guys are wondering, you gonna be good, butt. So we're going to take a look at the temperings real quick. And if you look, I think it's in the utility section. We've got, there's raw thorns. There we go. 11% thorns while fortified. So that's another thing that obviously is going to help you out when your thorns is that your fortification. You want to be fortified at all times, and obviously staying fortified is going to be a lot easier when you have like a ridiculously large amount of fortified, because most fortifies are based on percentage, but the amount of fortify that is being taken away from you when you get hit is based on the damage that's dealt to you. So the more HP you have, the more fortify you have, the more fortify you have, the harder it is for the monsters to take that fortify away, which is very nice. So all in all, there's definitely some offensive capabilities for the Doombringer, but it's extremely defensive as well. It heals you, gives you massive amounts of damage reduction, reduces the damage of the monsters around you, and in general just makes you into a tank. The flavor text on this says, whenever this ancient weapon or sword has reappeared throughout history, it portends a time of great strife as well as a devastating loss of life. On top of this, there's also one more thing that I haven't talked about. So it does do shadow damage. Now, this is another interesting aspect, and it can be used across all classes now, except for, I think the Spiritborn is the only one that's not going to be able to use it. But because it does shadow damage, you can also utilize this to activate the fourth pip on your Talrosh's Iridescent Loop if you're a sorceress. You can utilize this on a Shadow Necromancer to get free shadow damage, which can potentially help trigger your Shadowblade Key passive. You can obviously set up maybe like a Barbarian that does like massive amounts of non-physical damage. There's a lot of non-physical damage stuff on Barbarians, and this is just another way that you can add in a non-physical damage pip into the rotation. So like you could use Doombringer, you could use Azure Wrath, you could use Hellhammer, you could use the Berserking Cry as Fire, you can use the like Frosties. There's tons of various things on the Barbarian now that are like non-physical damage, and it could be kind of fun to just set up like a crazy non-physical build, with this being one of the many uniques that you're going to be using to get more non-physical damage. All non-physical damage modifiers enhance everything non-physical, so whenever you add non-physical damage, you get a bonus to fire, lightning, ice, shadow, poison, etc. It's all non-physical, not just one. And it actually applies to the multipliers and things too. So like if you have Frigid Fate, for instance, on your sorceress, good little tip, and you're a fire sorceress, grab the Frigid Fate passive, because if you have non-physical damage, which is really easy to obtain, the non-physical damage still counts as cold damage, and it will trigger and build and actually cap out the Frigid Fate legendary board, which is really nice. I think that's pretty much it for Doombringer. I also like the graphic on Doombringer. I think it's really cool. If you do destroy the Doombringer at some point, you will get the graphic to be able to apply cosmetically, which is pretty neat. But all in all, definitely a very interesting weapon. The only downside to this weapon, really, in my opinion, is that for a lot of builds that require specific weapons, like, if you're a Charge Bolt Sorceress using the Staff of Liam Neeson, jokes. If you're like an Endless Rage Sorceress and you're using the Staff of Endless Rage with the fireballs, or if you're specifically using, like the Shard of Verithiel and maybe like Ramaladni's, you really can't fit it in, which is unfortunate. Like, it's such a nice sword, but there are a lot of builds that just can't really fit the sword in, unfortunately. Which is, it's just sometimes that's just what happens. Anyway, as always, I hope you do appreciate these videos and Mr. Nimoy being a butt to me. I don't know what he's doing up there. He's always staring at the green screen. I hate to tell you, buddy, but if you jump on top of this green screen, you're going to fall. There's nothing up there. It's literally just a piece of cloth being held up by a small band. Yes, that's right. There's nothing up there, buddy. You're too fat. You're chunky. That's right. Chonky bonky. As always, be sure to hit that like button and the subscribe button if you enjoy the content. And as always, keep watching.